Bienvenidos, señores y señores, to another episode of the Bleed Lows Podcast. This episode of the Bleed Lows Podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting. And your favorite casino and card games are available to play right from your phone. So head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. And joining us on the Carne Asada for the very first time, this is a great honor for us because a lot of our viewers have always been saying, you guys got to have Steve Garvey on the show. Get Steve Garvey on the show. Well, guess what, guys? Steve Garvey has joined us on the show. Steve Garvey, bienvenido. ¿Cómo estás, amigo?
Bien, gracias.
I love it. See, Steve,
and you never asked me before. All you had to do was ask me, and I would have been on. But no, you went for the big guys. I know.
I love it that Steve gets the show. And by the way, Steve, I just need to ask. It seems like, I always like to start off the show in Spanish just to test people's Spanish. Sure. And your Spanish sounds great. In your playing days, it seems now it was more prevalent, it was a benefit to speak Spanish. But in your playing days there, were people already bilingual at that point, or was it just not that common?
No, I think, my first day up was September 69. So I think that it was the beginning, say in the early 70s, of the emergence of the Latin player. And Puerto Rico always seemed to dominate. And of course, Venezuela came along. And then ultimately, Dominican Republic became, just a wonderful training ground for the future of baseball and the emergence of the Latin player. So I was there. I was in Santo Domingo in 72 and 3 and 3 and 4. I played for Licey, the iconic blue team in Santo Domingo. Escogido was the red team. So the Giants sent 4 or 5 guys there, and the Dodgers sent 4 or 5 to Licey, which the godfather was Manny Mota. So couldn't have had a better place to play 2 winters in the Caribbean. But actually, I had taken Spanish classes in school, so I got to understand it quite well. I just couldn't conjugate very well. So. And I said one time on these Sunday post games, that went into the evening with a very wealthy Dominican who would have us over, and Lasorda was the manager, and he would be holding court, and people would be laughing for an hour or 2 hours. And I would say to Pedro, who was the gracious host, I said, Pedro, how's his Spanish? He says, oh, Steve, he said, he's very funny. He said, but he don't conjugate very well. I said, okay, I don't feel so bad. But, over the years, I've been able to pick up here and there, and then hanging out with, the great Hall of Fame announcer, Jaime Areen and Jorge and the guys. So I think I understand more than I probably let on. But all in all, when you talk about, and obviously your theme is this, but the emergence of the Latin player, and now how significant they are in baseball and in Dodger Stadium. I couldn't be happier. That's the thing about baseball. It's still the most inclusive sport. I mean, if you can run, throw, pitch, hit, if you're the son of a bank president or a sharecropper, you're going to be able to play. And it's a meritocracy, and that's why I'm proud to be an ambassador for the game and purport its history. So.
Steve, everybody that tells me that has played winter ball has raved about the experience. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like today's player, not that many players go and play winter ball. Do you think it would benefit them to go at least maybe just one season and experience winter ball?
Absolutely. But, there's been the emergence of the Arizona League and the development of that over the years, and it's easier to send guys there. It's easier to watch them and monitor them. But there's something about going to a foreign country or possession and experiencing 3 months there, and learning about the culture and trying to speak the language, all those things, which the Hispanic players appreciate. I did an interview one time with Jaime Areen. Jaime said, I want to do a deeper interview, late 70s, early 80s. And to do 3 parts. I want to cover everything from being a bat boy growing up to now. And I said, well, let's do it in Spanish. And he went, what? I said, you'll ask me the questions. I'll answer in English. And then if you'll have them printed out in Spanish, I will speak in Spanish. And at least I'll make the effort. And, people come up to me to this day and say, I remember that interview. Yeah, you didn't get a lot of, all the words right, but you tried. And we appreciated that. So I think that's the effort that takes place between staying domestically and playing in winter ball and then going outside the country.
So if I see you at Dodger Stadium, I can call you Esteban? I can go, Esteban Garvey!
Oh, yeah. Well, that's, the first game at Estadio Casquilla in Dominican Republic. It's opening day is a Sunday afternoon, and it's a big game. It's Licey against Escogido. And I remember the starting lineup in Spanish. And Esteban Garvey, and the crowd roared, on one half of the stadium. And the only way it was ever similar was when we'd go to San Diego, and the announcer there had his own way of presenting the lineup. There was a guy by the name of Enzo Hernandez, and the announcer go, and your leadoff man for the Padres, number of Enzo Hernandez. And I thought, I'm back at Estadio Casilla in Dominican Republic. So, yeah, that's the nuances of baseball, I guess.
Well, we wanted to have Steve on the show because on Friday, June 23rd, it marks the 50th anniversary of the Infield. This is an accomplishment that I think, the Dodgers already have huge historical accomplishments. They have Jackie Robinson, they have Sandy Koufax. But I think one of these historical accomplishments that is not spoken enough about is that this Infield played together. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. Was it 8 years straight that you guys?
About 8.5. Yeah.
Eight and a half. Yeah. And you guys doubled the next longest. And I think the argument, it's no contest. You guys are the most successful infield. What I wanted to ask you was, you came up in 69. Now, Ron Cey has told us that you guys single-handedly demolished the Dodgers farm system in the 70s. Because of you guys, the Dodgers did not produce any minor leaguers. How much time did you actually spend playing with those guys in the minor leagues before you guys actually started playing together in the major leagues?
Well, a couple of noted points is the draft of 68 arguably was the greatest draft in history. I think we had, and Mark Langell, a great Dodgers historian, would know exactly, but I want to say 7, 8, 9 guys in that draft that played over 9 years in the major leagues, which is just unheard of. And that became the nucleus for some of us coming up as early as 1970. Bill Buckner and I won the starting positions in spring of 70. We were essentially down in Spokane by the first part of May, weren't quite ready. The Dodger team wasn't very good, and the front office wanted to just get daily experience, along with Pishoric was in Spokane, and Russell up and down, Lopes, Bobby Valentine. And that team, the 1970 Spokane team, was voted the greatest minor league team in history. So you can see the sequence of the great draft of 68 leading to AAA, Spokane, and then Albuquerque up through 72. And then the emergence through different paths of getting to June 23rd of 1973. And the first night of the Infield being together. And that was the beginning of 8.5 years. And if you look at the golden era of the Dodgers, I think 73 to about 85 was the golden era. And that was predominantly anchored by that 68 draft.
La Princesa de Picolandia, I think, has some questions for you, considering she always talks about that era that you just referenced right now. Isn't that right, Alicia?
I do. There's nothing like it. And to hear it from Steve Garvey himself was just wow. Congratulations on what is coming for you guys, for you gentlemen, you scholars of baseball. This Friday, I want to know is this something that was on your calendar, was on your mind, or did one of the guys say, or Lopes, or did someone have to remind you that it was coming up, or was it always kind of in the back of your mind, like, oh wow, the anniversary of the best infield in Major League Baseball is coming up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm more of a historian because of my history of growing up as a bat boy in spring training in Florida for the Brooklyn and LA Dodgers. And I read books, so I understood the history of the Dodgers and Yankees. My parents are from New York. But I always think of anniversaries. I think they're important in life. I think they're important in business. They're important in sports. So I've been thinking about this as late as a couple of years ago. And, and the four of us get together 2 or 3 times every year. We like to do signings so that the public can share time with us and collect special items and so forth. So this came about relatively late, though, but still, it's going to be a great celebration on Friday night on a variety of levels. The great scouting staff of the Dodgers. The Dodgers' commitment to developing players who are probably very good athletes, and like Russell and Lopes, were very good center fielders. But the Dodgers saw potential, they saw a need, so they became the anchor at short and second of the greatest infield in history. I was kind of a wild arm third baseman, not a big demand after a while. When you throw over Wes Parker's head, a Gold Glover. But I had these old defensive back skills of quickness and agility, and not having to use your arm that much. So all of a sudden, on June 23rd, in between games of a doubleheader, we had been struggling against lefties, but I had been pinch hitting for Walt Olson, was leading the league, and we lose the first game 1-0 to Freddie Norman, crafty little left-hander that drove Walt crazy. And he always seemed to beat us. He said, "You guys are over swinging," but one thing leads to another. But so I got one of the 2 hits pinch hitting. So I'm sitting at my locker, and you get about 30 minutes between games. And Walt starts to pass by, and he stops and he looks at me and he said, "You ever play first?" I said, "Oh, sure." Well, I played one game in Little League and one game in AAA. I had a bad hamstring, and first base was the closest position to get to. And he said, "Well, grab a glove. Play first tonight. Don't trip over the bag. We're facing another lefty." And he said, "You've been hitting it pretty well." And I borrowed a glove, went out with the bat boy, threw around a little bit, started the game. And I think one of the first 2 plays was a ball hitting the hole, and Billy Russell came over the top and threw it, and it was in the dirt, and I picked it out. And I thought, wow, yeah, thank you, Lord. A couple innings later, throw up the line. I jump up, tag it, and just instinctively whirl around and tag the runner in the head. We get him there. And, I didn't know how treacherous that play was until you see it and you see first baseman. That's the one area they really can get hurt on defense is that kind of play. And made that. We won the game, got 2 doubles and a couple RBIs. And after the game, I'm sitting in my locker. And, those days you feel good about yourself. You've had a great podcast. It's been, everything's worked. Comes out of heaven. And all of a sudden, Walt comes by again. He had done a press conference. And he doesn't stop. But as he walks by, we hear, "You're in there tomorrow." And I looked at Steve Yeager and I said, "Yeager, is he talking to you?" He says, "No, I think he's talking to you." And he was. And I started the next day, and those 2 days were the beginning of 15 and a half years at first base. But I love to tell this story because it's a great example of, in life, no matter how hard you're struggling, you keep working, because every afternoon I'd be out at 2:30 with Dixie Walker, the hitting coach, and fielding at different places. And the harder you work, the more confidence you get that your time, you will be given another chance. So that, dedication, preparation equals success. When that opportunity came, I was ready, even though it was a position I hadn't played before. And so I always say, if the manager, the coach, your boss says, "Can you do this?" you say, "Yes, I can." And give it the best shot you can, because you never know what's going to be your destiny. And carpe diem, seize the moment. And that was the beginning of the rest of my career. Everything else before that was mental, physical, spiritual preparation for the moment when I said, "Yes, I can." So,
Wow. Juan, I did not know that. So taking that chance, and you thrived because you stayed ready. I love that. Life lessons from Mr. Garvey here, Juan.
No, hey, I mean, absolutely, Steve. I wanted to ask you because, I mean, you for our wrestling fans, everybody who listens to this show knows I'm a big wrestling fan. So I attribute the four of you guys like the four horsemen, and you are the Ric Flair of the four horsemen. And everyone knows that Ric Flair was the man, and individually, he was great. So there is you as an individual, you're a great ball player. What is a greater what speaks to your legacy? Your individual accomplishments or the fact that you are going to be closely tied to those other three guys for the rest of history?
Yeah. Well, I think when God gives you the skills to play a sport, and there are two different categories. There's individual, it's golf and tennis, and they're team sports. The ultimate in success is winning a world championship. So you work towards that. You develop your individual skills so that you perform at your position. And then you hope to be in a leadership position. And that's where the consecutive game streak came in. I think everybody asked about how could you play, 7.5 years straight. But to achieve a world championship like we did was, I hate to use the term, but it is the icing on the cake for this team that was adding pieces over probably a 6 or 7 year period. It seemed like it was the same team, but we added a Jimmy Wynn, we added a Dusty Baker, we added a Reggie Smith. I mean, guys would come in, and the team's like that now. I mean, this team looks like it's kind of got same guys over the last 7 or 8 years, but guys come and go, but the nucleus is there. So the nucleus was the infield from 73 to 82. Think about it. 4 guys. First of all, you have to be good enough to start. You have to be good enough to be successful every day. You have to be a cohesive unit. You all have to stay healthy. So there's so many variables in a longevity of something like an infield. I mean, you can't get maybe one guy in a team has spent 8.5 years with a team, much less 4 individuals, right? So it takes that. Then it takes an individual passion to be the best player on the field. And all your work, and again, remember, I came from a great minor league system, struggled for a few years, found my spot, and then embraced it. And ultimately, a wild arm third baseman ends up with Gold Gloves and an errorless season and all these things. So your individual contribution and dedication, the core being that infield, and then Dusty and Reggie and Rick and those guys doing their thing, led to this golden era. So it's just not one thing, but it's that recipe that adds up to, and the significance is the history of the Dodger organization and what they've always tried to do, and that's put the most quality product on the team that plays for the fans, plays for the community, and for the love of the game.
I lament that the Dodgers took so long in the season to announce that they're going to be recognizing you guys, because it's a big deal, because there's a lot of young kids that don't know the story of the infield. And I think it's important, when you're at the stadium, they're always throwing up legends of the game, and I see parents talk to their kids and they go, "Oh, this guy was a great player." And that's what makes baseball baseball. I don't think you have that in the NBA, in football. I mean, you do have it, but I just don't think you have it to the same level as you have it with baseball. Because Alicia, aren't your parents like huge Steve Garvey fans? Didn't they instill who Steve Garvey was to you?
Huge parents. I mean, Steve's been so gracious to my family. I've been honored to interview Steve a few times on other media outlets, but he has always been such a good guy, with my mom especially, because I liked what you said, Juan, about Steve Garvey being the Ric Flair of the Four Horsemen.
Yes. Woo!
Steve, I know you're being super humble, which is your nature, but you were a rock star, okay? You were a rock star. You are a rock star, con permiso. You had fans running out of their seats onto the field trying to give you smooches. You had women wearing your face emblazoned on their t-shirts. You had my mom who knew your stats, and she's not a stat nerd. Like, it was so fun, and it's still fun to hear how you and the fellow infielders impacted the game. And one, to your point, if young people don't know all of the details, it's great that this Friday is happening for these gentlemen, because it also explains why Dodger baseball is at the standard it is, right? Why other fans wish they had a team like the Dodgers, why other organizations wish they had the system and the culture. And the Infield, these four gentlemen were a huge part of that standard. Am I wrong?
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And the thing about baseball and the other team sports are moving at a certain pace. Hockey, which I think has done a phenomenal job, is the fastest team sport. Basketball, one end to the other, big men, small men, executing. Football, 11 guys on 11 guys. The great charm of baseball is the pace of the sport and the humanity of it. Baseball doesn't try to hide the ball, like they do in football. You can see the faces of the players. There's a pace to it. So especially, you always think of the male fan, but the women embrace baseball because it is slow like that. You can see the individual. You see us fail and succeed in real time. If I pop up with the bases loaded in the bottom of the ninth, I don't get overs. That's why I get around with a lot of my actor friends, who want to be, me or the other guys. Oh, I'd love to be you. I said, well, what if you pop up like that? He goes, oh yeah, I don't get 22 takes like I normally do. I said, no. I said, but people know you because they see how you act on the good days and bad days. And especially, like I said about my consecutive game streak, I take so much pride in it. I went out every day for 1,207 games. And people knew that if any way I could get out there, I would, because I owed it to them. And through migraine headaches and hamstrings and all these things, it also showed the leadership that I had for my fellow players, too. And it's always in God's hands. Anything can happen. And it ended on a slide at home plate where I didn't go into Pascual Perez's, knee as he was covering home plate on a pass ball because I didn't want to hurt him. I stuck my hand back and my thumb, tore ligament, everything. But that's why baseball is so special. It's the humanity of it, real time. You can get to know the players. You feel like you know them because of this failure and success and how they treat the two imposters, as the poem goes. So.
I agree 100%. And I mean, my mom and I watched, soap operas. I think baseball's very romantic that way. You have good guys, bad guys. You have the villains. Oh, much like wrestling one. You have the good guys and the bad guys. And
it all goes back to wrestling, Alicia. I'm telling you.
Well, like this weekend, it's the Houston Astros are going to have that lingering, tag on them, of cheaters. And, I think the best thing for them is that Dusty Baker's their manager. Dusty can deflect those things because of who he is. But the fans are still going to boo him. They're going to say they still cheated. And so they're on we're on the white horses this weekend, and they're on the dark horse. And it's kind of fun for a weekend, and they go their way, Dodgers go another way. So
I love it. I can't wait to see you all on the field. One, or Mr. Garvey, are all four of you, I want to be polite at first. Are all four of you going to join each other for the celebration on Friday?
Well, Davey has had some health issues, so he's back on the East Coast. But Billy and Ron and I are going to be out there. And the biggest unknown right now is throwing out the first pitch. I'm not so sure the three of us can get our arms over our head anymore. So I've been lobbying for grandsons to throw the ball to the catcher. But no, we'll be out there, and I'm pretty sure they're going to have a phenomenal video that everybody will love to film while it's going on the screen.
That's not a bad idea at all. when the Dodgers honored the great Jaime Jarin, his
Yeah.
grandson Stefan threw out the first pitch, I believe.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and got it over the plate. So,
Oh, and I visit probably 4 or 5 minor league parks this summer. I really like it. It's great to go there. I sign for a couple hours, and I'll throw out the first pitch. And now I'll pick a little leaguer out of the stands as I'm going down and have them come out. And it's a great moment for him or her. I've taken girls out there too, and their families, and they get the ball and so forth. So it's a chance to do something interactive, and it's good for them, and it saves me from having to throw 10 feet instead of 60.
love it.
Steve, we want to thank you for your time. We're going to wrap the show the way we always wrap the show. We have our what we call our kickback questions, which are rapid fire questions. But if you got a long answer, then by all means, go ahead and do it.
Sure.
But a few questions for you. You mentioned the Astros. Mm-hmm. In your era, Steve, if a team got caught doing what the Astros did and the commissioner of baseball did nothing about it, how would you guys have handled it?
Well, if you remember, the beginning of our union was really Marvin Miller. He was a phenomenal labor lawyer, and beginning with Marvin in the 70s, and then fast forward, we gained tremendous strides, arguably the greatest union in sports. The union is there to protect the players, but I think that the union at that time, we would have felt that we're not going to protect those that cheat the game. That even though we were gaining strides and parity, by the way, it was still done with the perspective of sportsmanship and fair play. So I think that the union may have maybe treated it differently, and I know the commissioner probably would have treated it differently. So I don't think it was handled as deeply as it should have been, but it's come and gone, and hopefully everyone will learn a lesson from it.
I want to ask you, we were talking about how it's important to remember great Dodgers of the past to make sure their memory stays alive forever. This is just me being selfish just because he was one of my favorite players growing up, but Pedro Guerrero, I feel a lot of people don't realize how good that dude was. I know you didn't get a chance to play with him that long, but he played an instrumental part in that 81 World Series. What are your thoughts on Pedro Guerrero?
Well, I remember him coming up and from the Dominican and seeing him in spring training. That's where you really, I think spring training is a time where you get a chance to assess the young players, and you look at the players that maybe need a brother like Steve Sachs was, he and I, somebody to mentor them. Pedro had a tremendous amount of ability, but he was spread out too far, and he was out here, and I told him, you got to get, stand up more right. And he never forget the little times that we all spent. I mean, it wasn't just me. A lot of the guys, when we saw somebody who was receptive, then we knew that we could get to him then. And again, that's another big part of successful organizations and teams is that they're very collaborative. They work together. The older guys help the younger guys. And the Dodgers team now over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years has done a phenomenal job inside the clubhouse of nurturing that type of thing. But Pedro went on to be a very, very good player, and that 81 World Series could not have won it without him. So you picked a very good player to have as your idol, so to speak. And by the way, he was a character in the clubhouse, and we needed more guys like that. So every now and then I'd go, hey, and he knew he was probably taking a little too far. You never want to go over the edge a little bit, So you know what, guys, getting mad. We're gonna have fun, but we got a game to play too.
So he would listen to you then because you got that Lycée experience in you, right, Steve?
A lot of cred right there, I'll tell you. And we won a Caribbean World Series my first year. And, of course, Manny, like I said, was the godfather of Lycée. And I watched him. I was a pretty young guy at the time. And how he was so influential in the community in the Dominican. And what we did around the holidays where he gave out tens of thousands of dollars in clothes and food. And then how he took that and in his adopted country, the United States, did exactly the same thing in the community here. So he truly is a man for all seasons and somebody that mentored me.
Are you the only person that could have maybe related to Valenzuela during Fernando Mania? Because, before Fernando Mania gets a lot of credit for, it started the popularity. You guys were drawing fans before Fernando showed up, and you were as we said, you were the Ric Flair of the Dodgers.
Right.
Seeing him go through that, was there any advice that you gave him to how to handle that?
The best advice I gave him was never let Jaime Jarrín get more than 3 feet away from you at all times. Jaime Jarrín during that period was the angel on his shoulder, so to speak, and there were some other key people. There's a new book by Eric Sherman, and it's called
Daybreak at Chavez Ravine.
Daybreak at Chavez Ravine. And Eric's a phenomenal writer. I would recommend it to anyone. The first 40 pages talk about the development of Chavez Ravine and how all this came about and teed up Fernando coming in there and changing the culture of Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles and the rest of the country, too. I mean, if you think of seismic change in California and you think of earthquakes, seismic change in sports in California was Fernando and his emergence in Dodger Stadium. And that book is perfect. But Fernando, even for his young age, and nobody knew exactly how old he was, right? Because of his maturity. And Fernando had this way of being a little self-deprecating, but staying within himself. His great ability to focus under new environments was one of the big reasons for his success. And then realizing that he came up with certain pitches and pitching skills, but that he was open to adding more that would make him a more complete pitcher. And when he adopted the screwball, that changed everything for him. So he went from a small little spring training, and then he gets to Dodger Stadium, and he's there. And then the first big night away from Dodger Stadium was at Shea Stadium in New York, because there's nothing like New York and the press there. And we all tried to help him as much as possible. But again, Jaime was the one that shielded him and got him through that first weekend and that baptism into New York.
Last two, Steve, we already mentioned Ric Flair and our love for wrestling. Were you ever a fan of the male soap opera at any point in your life, even when you were a kid, maybe?
I've always gotten a kick at it. And thanks so much for your reference, comparison with Rick. He's done a phenomenal job in that sport of, promoting it. But I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and they had a huge wrestling audience there at the Armory, and a lot of the big Cowboy Luttrell and all these wrestlers back in the 50s and 60s, the real beginning of I call it entertainment wrestling, and that was around, and I used to love to watch it. And then the second part of really starting to get into wrestling was when I went to Michigan State University in '66, and they had some great wrestling teams, and I got a chance to really watch that at any chance I could. So yes, I am a fan. I don't see it as much as I'd like to. My kids are UFC guys, but maybe someday I'll go with you and I can sit there and you can teach me about it.
There we go. Last one. And you're a good person to ask this question because you played in LA, but you also played in San Diego. On this show, we are big on tacos. We love tacos. So, Steve, we want to know, what is your favorite taco and where do you go to get that taco? And if you want to give us a place in San Diego too, or if you just want to tell us which one had better tacos, we can go that route too.
Well, I don't have to go far because my son Ryan is an excellent chef and a grill chef too. So he does a pulled pork and a tri-tip taco with all the ingredients, that's phenomenal. So again, I don't have to go too far. It's not going to be Garvey's Taqueria and franchising, but 4 or 5 times a year, Ryan, we bribe them to go out there, and we live in the desert, and it gets a little hot, to go out there and do a little sweating and make those great tacos for us.
You get the fancy tacos there.
Oh yeah,
Delicious.
Alicia, you want to bring us home here?
No, I want to get in on some of those tacos, and that is love that he goes out in the desert to make some tacos for you. Is that not someone who cooks for you and tacos in the desert? That's love.
Can't beat that. And by the way, you mentioned moms. I'm huge with moms and grandmas now. I just want to tell your mom hi, your grandma. I mean, I can walk around now, and when I'm at the stadium, I'm always so flattered because, the moms will come up. The young kids, you got to Google me probably.
Okay, so you brought up the moms. I have to go there. I wasn't sure if you would remember this, but one of the times you were so gracious to my family, you gave my mom a little besito on the cheek, and the whole game, I'm not going to wash my face. It's just such... Oh my goodness. And there's my dad smiling, but like eye rolling. So
I know. You see, and the neat thing about this is I could do that, and I could look at the dads, and they knew that it was kind of special, and they were sharing the queen or the princess with me, so.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. Because you're Steve Garvey, because you are the Ric Flair of Major League Baseball. Right. My dad was cool with it. I don't think anyone else could have gotten away with that.
That's right. Oh, well.
It's a great memory. All of the cousins bring it up all the time. We see you around the stadium, and we don't want to bother you, but they turn to my mom, and they're like, oh, there's your man's, or, there's Steve Garvey.
You better bother me. She better come knock me down or grab me or something. So. But that, and one last thing, I know, probably wrapping up, but I've always said we're in the memory business. And at the end of the day, people come up to me every week and say, I'll never forget when Grandpa took me to the bleachers on Sundays, or the family went to games on Saturdays or whatever it is. I never forget this play or that play, or the World Championship. And that's why we play the game. And you can't forget we're in the entertainment business. It's not life and death. But if we can create memories that are, by the way, the greatest currency in life, you can't sell it, you can't give it away, it's truly ours, then we're successful.
You know what, Steve? I think that says more about you, though, because not everyone is like that. I don't, and maybe this is something that you've gotten with age. I feel like maybe this is how you were during your prime, but I don't see a lot of players. They don't give off that vibe that they're in the memory business. So maybe you're just a throwback to a different time, or it's maybe just that's who you are.
Well, I think it's both. Growing up, again, as a bat boy, from 7 to say 13, with the boys of summer, the Brooklyn Dodgers and then LA Dodgers, sitting next to Gil Hodges and Pee Wee Reese and Roy Campanella and Jackie Robinson, and watching them. And for 6-7 years, watching their consistency and the humanity of them and how they treated the fans taught me that if someday I got to be, in major leagues and a Dodger, right? Who would have ever thought that maybe I could be like them and show the fans the respect and how much they see. In the off season, none of them went back to their real homes. They stayed in Brooklyn because it was family in Brooklyn. And it was the streets of Brooklyn. I memean, they got jobs, but those fans, took them to the diner in the morning for breakfast, but all the guys recognized them. That's why it was, Ebbets Field was such a family place. And of course, when Mr. O'Malley went out west, that's why they were so sad and mad at him, because the family broke up. But we had it, and they had it, and that's the most important thing.
Well, we want to thank you, Steve. You've been so gracious with your time. Sorry that we held you over. No. We're all looking forward to seeing you guys get that recognition that you guys deserve in Dodger Stadium. I think you're absolutely right. I agree with you. You guys are the golden era. I think you are the reason why the Dodgers are so popular in Southern California. So we want to thank you. Where can our listeners, our viewers, follow you on social media, Steve? Or if there's anything else you want to plug, and now would be the time.
Oh, Steve Garvey 6 on Instagram. I like Instagram. Yeah, so that's the best place to go. I seem to be doing some interesting things, and okay, I'm exploring a run for the U.S. Senate. You've probably heard that. I only tell you guys.
Thank you. You saved me the awkward moment.
Have a decision in the next few weeks, and
well, I mean, you are a brave man for going into that world, Steve. But I'm sure you have your reasons, and we can save them for another time. But we want to thank you very much for joining the show.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. God bless.
God bless you, Steve.
Thank you.
See you at the station.
And once again, a big thank you to Steve Garvey, or as he likes to be called in the Dominican, Esteban Garvey. Babyface, what are your thoughts on the Garv?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve Garvey, I think we mentioned this when we talked to Fernando. Steve Garvey is also one of those players that I think even today, though he played right in the 70s and 80s, right, he's still one of those guys that's really like recognized, right? And like even to today's fan, like they see, oh, Steve Garvey, he's like one of those guys that kind of has transcended, all that, those gaps of time, right? And he's kind of still very popular with a lot of people. When they see him, it's like, hey, that's Steve Garvey. I know that guy, right? He's one of those guys, like one of those old time players that is still very cool. A lot of people just they want to talk to him and hear what he's got to say. And he's for me, he's one of those guys too, because he's one of those guys that right in his era is kind of like when I started watching baseball. Late 80s, mid 80s, late to the late 80s and the 90s. Then Steve Garvey was one of those guys that I grew up on.
What was really interesting to me was he was the first one of the infield to get called up, and he talked about how he struggled, and he ended up having a great career for the Dodgers. And then later on, he achieved a little more success. He wasn't completely done with the Dodgers, but when he went down to the show pods, he took the show pods to the World Series. But he's pretty much viewed, even though his numbers retired in San Diego. Everyone views him as a Dodger, and there is this belief shared by some people that eventually he is going to get into the Hall of Fame. Babyface, where do you stand on that? Do you think Esteban Garvey is finally going to get into the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I think he has a chance. I think he'd be in that with the veterans committee, right? I think maybe down the road, I think he can get in. I mean, I think he had a solid career, right? That mid 70s, through like 80s, right? Like he was. I mean, what other first baseman was like probably better than Steve Garvey, right? I mean, multiple All-Star, right? He won an MVP, right? Said multiple All-Star games. I mean, I think he had that solid stretch right there, and I think eventually he probably will get in there, and eventually leading to the Dodgers to retire his number.
I mean, I don't know. I think Willie Stargell played for first base for a while in the 70s, and Pete Rose played first base in the 70s also. It's really interesting because if you break down Esteban's numbers, I go back to that same old adage. If you have to think about it, they're not Hall of Famers, and you don't have to put everybody into the Hall of Fame. I actually think the Hall of Fame would be better if there was less people in it, because it is the elite. But it is interesting in the sense that Garvey was the man in the 70s. And even though we're talking about the infield, that famous infield of Ron Cey, Bill Russell, and Davey Lopes, we talked about it with him. And I really do appreciate that he recognized the fact, and he also embraced the fact that he's the Ric Flair of that infield. But he was. I mean, it was Steve Garvey and then the infield, you loop them all in together. But Garvey was the guy. And to today's, fans who lived through that era, Garvey was the guy that they were talking about. And for a decade, even more so than a decade, for Garvey to be the main Dodger, I mean, that's a huge accomplishment. I mean, if you break it down through eras, right? In the 80s, you would say Valenzuela. That's who the main Dodger was. But then Hershiser came in towards the mid 80s, and then he was the main guy. Then you could say Mike Piazza was the main guy for a while. Now, in this current era, clearly, I mean, for 16 years, when you think of the Dodgers, you think of Clayton Kershaw. Yeah, he has a lot of other stars around him, but when you think of the Dodgers, Clayton Kershaw is the first guy that you think of. During his era, Steve Garvey was the first Dodger that you thought of, right?
Yeah, he was a guy. So, real quick, do you think he had a better career than Harold Baines?
Wow. Why? It's not Harold Baines' fault that he got into the Hall of Fame. And this is why it cracks me up that you guys give me so much shit about this argument on me being so selective on the Hall of Fame. You guys don't think Harold Baines should be in the Hall of Fame, which then you guys are agreeing with me. We don't need to put everybody into the Hall of Fame. Steve Garvey had a great career. There is no shame in Steve Garvey not being in the Hall of Fame. They're absolutely, I mean, there's so many guys. Everybody that makes it to the show is good. There's no chumps. I know we like to sit here and say, this guy sucks. It's like, dude, that guy doesn't suck. Compared to great people in Major League Baseball, yeah, he's maybe not that good. But, I mean, Garvey, he had a great career. But are you going to sit there and say that, no, I mean, no doubt Steve Garvey should be in the Hall of Fame?
I mean, obviously he wasn't like, first ballot Hall of Fame, but I think his career warrants him making it into the Hall. I think he was, top elite player, like I said, during that time. And I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, there's a lot of guys like that, right? Where the Dodgers had like Maury Wills, right? Like Maury Wills isn't in the Hall of Fame, right? And a lot of people think he should be in the Hall of Fame. So I think it kind of fits in that same place.
So we're just going to put everybody in. That's what it's going to come to.
I mean, you're not putting everybody in, but I mean, I think the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, is the hardest one to get into right now. Is the hardest one to get into.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think there is guys that are worthy of that Hall, and maybe because it. I mean, I don't know. I was gonna say somehow you distinguish between maybe they didn't get in. I guess it depends how they got in. I mean, I don't know.
Right? Yeah, they got in on their 10th try.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing. What's really interesting is, have you seen Curt Schilling's numbers? Like, if you look at Curt Schilling's numbers, there's a lot of people that make an argument like, "Hey, dude, that dude should be in the Hall of Fame." Now, I don't have a memory of Curt Schilling being a dominant pitcher. Like, I don't think of Curt Schilling in the same venue, in the same manner as I think of Pedro, right? Or Randy Johnson. Like, those are pitchers that I felt dominated their era. But Curt Schilling was good, especially in the playoffs. He was really damn good. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, the Hall of Fame should be for the elite, the best of the best.
I think the Schilling thing is because of the postseason. He had great postseason numbers, right? So he hasn't gotten in. So I think it's maybe like Madison Bumgarner, when it's his time, they're gonna be like, he's not a Hall of Famer, right? But they're gonna be, but look at his postseason numbers. I think he's gonna kind of fall in the same place as Schilling. They're gonna be looking. Well, look at the postseason he had, but obviously his career numbers don't warrant it.
Is Oral Hershiser a Hall of Famer?
Oral, I don't think so. I mean, I think.
But can't you talk about Oral Hershiser the same way you talk about Bumgarner and you talk about Schilling?
I mean, I think Oral's span wasn't as long, maybe, as some of these other guys.
He had a great playoff in '85. It's just they didn't make it out of the NLCS. '88 was ridiculous. Right, what he did. Mm-hmm. And then when he was with the Indians, he was good when they made it to the World Series against the Marlins. Yeah. So, I mean, Jack Morris is another guy who I think is remembered more for his playoff success than during the regular season. I mean, it's just really interesting. The fact that the criteria constantly changes, the fact that, like you said, you can use arguments now. Well, if Harold Baines is in, then Steve Garvey is in. Especially now, if Fred McGriff is in, then Steve Garvey should be in.
What
McGriff almost hit 500 home runs.
Yeah,
So
what do you think of the like the team Hall of Fames? Like, I know Dodgers don't really have a team Hall of Fame, but they have that legends, right? That they just
the
started.
legends of,
and you have someone like the Cardinals do it. We saw David Freese actually. He said, "Hey, no thanks, but I don't feel worthy to be in that."
Yeah, which I found really, really interesting.
What do you think of like team Hall of Fames? Like, is that something you consider? Or
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because Garvey was like we just mentioned in the 70s. Garvey was the dude. That's who you associated with the Dodgers. So yeah, you put him in the Team Hall of Fame because when you compare him to other Dodgers, he was elite in terms of what he did for that organization.
Do you retire his number like the Yankees do when they put, his monument out there in center field?
Yeah, if the Dodgers if they didn't commit themselves to that policy of only putting a Hall of Famers, Garvey is a guy whose number should be retired at Dodger Stadium because of his contributions to the Dodgers. But because the Dodgers, committed themselves to that policy, which they didn't have to, I mean, look, one of the things that, I haven't been to the new Yankee Stadium, but a lot of what attracts tourism to Yankee Stadium is that they get to walk through the Hall of Monuments. And I think that's great because you're celebrating the Yankees. You're celebrating their history. That stuff to me makes sense. But when we're talking about the Hall of Fame, when we're talking all of Major League Baseball, these are the elite of the elite, unless you are recognizing someone specifically for a certain accomplishment. That I don't have a problem with. I mean, we have broadcasters that are in the Hall of Fame. You have that kind of stuff. So I don't have an issue. I think all teams should do that. I mean, the Angels. I mean, look, the Show Pods. Garvey played for the Show Pods for 2 years. And he got his number retired over there, right? And it was for 2 years. Garvey was huge for the Show Pots. He got them to their first World Series. And that means a lot. And if a team wants to go ahead and do that, look at the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks have Gonzalez's number. Luis Gonzalez's number is retired. Do we think Luis Gonzalez is an elite baseball player? But he was a huge part of that Diamondbacks team that won the World Series. He got the game-winning hit. It's the history of that team. I think that's very different than the history of all of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get the Hall of Fame rule, and then I get teams should recognize players that made a big impact on their organization and retire their numbers. But then I'm also weary of like the Yankees, right? Like retiring guys like, I mean, I guess Paul O'Neill made a big impact for the Yankees, right? But it's like it kind of gets a little overboard. I mean, I guess there's still got to be some type of discipline, I guess, to it. I wouldn't. Yeah, Dodgers could retire 6, right, for Garvey and Orioles number and
exactly and Mota's.
See, but then it's like all these numbers that start getting retired, like the Yankees. I mean, they don't have a single digit number right available, right? I mean, that's and now. So that's
but why? Why don't they? Because they had great people that played. And that to me is a great way of promoting their history. It's like we've run out of numbers because we've had so many people that were great for our organization. I mean,
what are they going to do then? Like triple digit numbers? Like what do you start doing after that point? Like,
I think it's been, maybe it was in basketball. I don't know if it necessarily was in baseball, but they've unretired numbers with the permission of the person whose number was retired to allow them to wear it. If it got to that point where you ran out of numbers, I could see them sitting there going, okay, you can go ahead and wear it, because we need the number, but it doesn't change the fact that the person still, that number got retired. Why did it get retired? It got retired because of so-and-so. Look, I do think Garvey's number should be retired at Dodger Stadium. He's that important. I think Hershiser's should, be, because everybody talks about what Hershiser did. And it's because his 88 season was so ridiculous. But Hershiser was really good for them since he came up. He had a good run with the Dodgers for the 80s. Look, Mike Piazza is a Hall of Famer. 31 should be retired at Dodger Stadium. But because of the way Piazza left the Dodgers, the fact that Piazza doesn't have a good relationship with the Dodgers, that number's not retired. But it should be, don't you think? Don't you think 31 should be retired?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe they can still somehow honor those numbers, but I mean, maybe still kind of keep them in circulation somehow, like they're recognized as special numbers. And I mean, maybe you just don't give them out as often or
you give them out to a very special person is what you do. A special player. Yeah. I mean, look, the Dodgers did this to themselves. They shouldn't have committed to that policy. I mean, you're just going to get. I mean, that standard is so great, because the thing is like I said, I use the Diamondbacks. They have like 3 retired numbers, and one of them is Jackie Robinson. So it's like when you sit there and you look at that, and you look at how many Dodgers players' jerseys have been retired, and a lot of people think, hey, there should be more Dodger player jerseys retired. But it still seems like it's a lot of numbers that are retired for the Dodgers. And then you look at the Diamondbacks, and I get it. The Diamondbacks don't have the history that the Dodgers have, but that's the point, right? The point is to acknowledge, look how great the Dodgers have been and for how long they've been great, right? Because that's the other thing that you look at, right? When you're looking at retired numbers, the last number that got retired, when did that person play? So, I mean, I know it would mean a lot to Steve Garvey for him to make it into the Hall of Fame. So I'm not going to hold that against him. If he gets in, he gets in. I just, for me, and I've always felt like this, if you have to think about it, they don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame should be for players that you were just like, we were so lucky to watch that guy play baseball. He was so good in a league where everyone is good. He was better than everyone. Like these guys that, I mean, we'll talk about it on another show. I like talking to Steve Garvey only because, and he mentioned it there towards the end, he is such a politician. And I'm sure he's going to make his announcement whether he's running or not. But any question you ask Steve Garvey, he doesn't shy away from it. He will talk to you. Whether he answers your question or not, that's a different story, but he is going to at least respond to what you said. So I do enjoy talking to Esteban Garvey. I appreciate him sharing those stories about the Winter League, and he gets the show. Before we wrap things up, Babyface, any last words on Esteban?
Yeah, I wish we kind of maybe could have got it out a little bit more of him, right? If he's going to run, right? He kind of like, oh, okay, yes, fine, yes, it's true. I'm considered. So it was kind of funny when, the way he kind of let it out at the end. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what he does. I mean, I think, he might be successful in that field,
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice if he would have broke the news on the Bleed Lows podcast, right? All of a sudden, we would have become a political show. But anyways, that's going to do it for this episode of the Bleed Lows podcast. Once again, make sure you guys are subscribed to the podcast and are subscribed to our YouTube channel. We got an interview with Julio Urias right after his rehab start in Rancho Cucamonga that is only available on our YouTube channel. So go check that out and subscribe to it. So, yo ha sido su servidor, Juan Ramírez, de parte de mi colega Babyface. Nos vemos para la próxima. This episode of the Bleed Lows podcast has been brought to you by Bet Online, where the game starts.